This is Lynn Fraser with the Kiloby Center for Recovery. I'm here today with Karen R. Koenig. We're going to talk about food addiction, disordered eating, that whole area that's so important. And a lot of times people, even once they've dealt with the addiction of alcohol or other drugs, they're still finding that food is such an issue and very widespread in the community too. And Karen Koenig has talked a lot about this over the years. She's interviewed in many places. I've been following her Facebook group, Karen Koenig, Normal Eating. And I'd love to have the chance for everybody to see her and understand a little bit from her perspective. So Karen, if you'd like to go ahead and introduce yourself, please.
Hi, thank you for having me. I am a clinical social worker by training. I also have a master's in education, expert in the psychology of eating, which is the how and why we eat, not the what of eating. Also, I am a recovered chronic dieter, binge eater, and person who had bulimia for about a year and a half. So my own recovery really adds to my clinical knowledge and helps me with therapists.
And so can you speak a little bit about that process for you, your personal journey into realizing that you had a disorder, and then what did you do from there?
Well, there were several realizations. I thought it was cool to restrict my eating. So it never bothered me when I was eating. I had a little diary and I wrote, only ate an apple today. I mean, now they would call it restricted eating, bordering on anorexia. But, back then when I was a teenager, there wasn't a lot of negative connotation, person who knew about it. So I think it was when I got into, and I did a lot of secret eating, overeating. When I got into college, I knew there was something going on because I had a woman who lived next door in the dorm, and we used to have binging contests. And even we knew that this was a weird thing to be doing, like to eat a quart of ice cream faster.
Wow.
But then became a bonding experience for the two of us, and then a secret just of the two of us. So I went from just my secret to now I, had somebody else. And then I dieted and binged, and I was working in advertising, and I started to purge because everybody looked thin, and advertising is a place where appearance is important. I happened to mention it to a friend. She just set me straight. She said, "You're doing that. You need to go to a therapist. Let me know when your appointment is." She was very serious. And so I would say that really helped to start my recovery. I read all the books I could on binge eating. I talked to people. I was much more open about it after that. And I decided if other people could do it, people wrote books about it, and they could do it, I could do it. And so I would say now I am half a lifetime recovered.
Wow. So that was all happening when you were still at college?
College, 20s. I think by the early 30s, I was moving into my, what I would call recovery.
Mm-hmm.
And taking better care of myself. And of course, now when I look back, I realize it was all self-care all along. That was more self-care, good self-care. And that was what the shift was, wanting to take.
So can you go a little bit deeper into that? Because so many people, it's clear now that addictive eating and any kind of addiction really is an attempt to take care of ourselves somehow. It's an attempt to escape out of a situation we're uncomfortable with or to manage our emotions, something like that. And so how did you get to really be able to tolerate your own experience? What was that journey of healing like for you when you were going from not being able to manage eating in a healthy way and then moving into real positive self-care?
I would start by saying I'm one of the people who when I smoked cigarettes a long time ago, I hated it. I knew it was killing me. I did not have very good powers of denial, which
Ah,
actually were, it turned out that they have served me very well.
yes.
The fact that I can't go into denial
Hmm.
easily. And so then I felt the same way about food. Um, this is really hurting me. I don't want to be doing this. And I think that takes a while to get to, from I want to maybe I don't want to. Let's look, sometimes I do and sometimes I don't, to a much stronger, I really don't want to do this behavior. And hell or high water, I will stop it. And so I think a lot of people are not at that place. They spend a lot longer time saying, oh, this is okay. I don't, it's going to be worse if I give it up. To me, there was nothing worse than having binge eating or purging. I don't really subscribe to the addiction model at all with food. Um, I think that there's a lot said for brain chemistry and that we're all different, and some people can get hooked on food more easily than others. Um, but even well, and even then, um, it's learning the skills that you need to care for yourself, wanting it more than you want a piece of cake, second helping of pasta, feeling proud of yourself because it's dysregulated eating gives you shame-based. And self-care came to me through therapy on and off years. And now I look back and I think, did I take it? I mean, it's a strange thing for even people listening to ask themselves, why on earth would you not take care of the one body that you get? When you can see it as self-care, it's like Eureka, all the lights go on.
One thing I realized a while ago was that I had always put emotional self-care ahead of physical self-care. So I had always put basically emotional numbing or escaping from my emotions ahead of taking care of my body. And my body was just always kind of the last priority. Is that something that you see with people?
Um, I do. They don't want to feel. I mean, a lot of people come in. First of all, they have no idea why we even have emotions. They're just, I call these annoying, pesky things. And if they would just go away, life would be pretty good.
Right.
So some of it is really understanding, why do we have emotions. I don't know that I thought I was an emotional eater. I didn't connect it that much. It was just, I found myself in the cookie jar. I found, a half a bag of candy gone. But I certainly see it with clients, that sense of I don't want to feel, and sort of an anger and disappointment that they need to. But I will say, once they learn why they need to, and they get it.
Okay. So what's that journey like? Can you say a little bit more about that and the why? What happens when we don't feel?
Well, I liken emotions to senses. We have the senses externally and emotions internally to tell us how to interact with the world. So, what happens if you smell smoke and it gets really warm in the room? You want your senses to say, get out.
Right.
And so emotions are to get us to do something that will either help us avoid pain or bring us pleasure. And that's why they've evolved, and why all humans and pre-humans even have had them. So it's just information, like facts, like text, like emails. And if you view them neutrally that way, then you say, oh, I have this emotion for a reason. Let's see what the message is, and if I need to do anything about it. Sometimes it's junk mail, something comes in and take it personally, and then we say, that's ridiculous. They treat everybody that way. It wasn't
Right.
about me. So then we get rid of the hurt. Other times we need to know when someone hurts us, disappoints us, betrays our trust, because that says something about the relationship. And as people get that, life gets better twofold. They
Mm-hmm.
stop the eating so much, and they really pay attention, value the emotions rather than push them away. They don't want to be numbing.
Right. And then the relationships would also get better.
Yes, then people they choose, oh, for sure. It's really all connected.
So there's so many things I want to follow up on here. One, maybe just so that to get it into the conversation, because I might not remember to come back to it. You referred to being in an advertising agency, everybody's thin. There's been a lot of talk in the last 10 years in particular, and a big shift around shame-based interventions around body size. And I know in France, I think it is that they've outlawed models that are under a certain size. Can you comment on how that's gone and what you've seen as the continuum and the change in how that atmosphere is over the last 20 or 30 years that you've been doing this work?
Well, I think it's changed, and I also think it hasn't changed. It's not that I see any decrease in people coming to see me because they hate their bodies.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm hoping that on a real macro level, there is change, and we often don't see the results of it for decades or generations. So I can't say that I've seen in my work changes, but I love what's happening. One of the bigger things, and I'm really fussy about it, is not using the term overweight. And because that means that literally beyond a certain weight, you're in a pejorative state.
You're over
Right.
what you should be. Yeah.
Yes. And who says what's an exact weight for us? So I use higher weight or high weight. And
Mm-hmm.
I try when in my writing to do that, to speak to clients. And I do think there's been a shift away from dieting,
Mm-hmm.
which is good news. And then, of course, followed by the bad news of the shift towards bariatric surgery. We finally got away from diets and how they cause rebound eating and they make us better. And now we have this other thing that's also this miracle promise, which is really scary.
Right. So you don't recommend that? You think people would be better off to not do that?
I think it's individual. I have clients in the 500-pound range. Maybe it would be okay for them when they get their eating problems under control. But as a client who had bariatric surgery said to me, no, you can still fit a Snickers bar in that little pouch.
Right.
So that's what she began to do. That
Right.
was sort of exciting for her. So, what was the point of going through all that? And what bothers me is when people don't try all the other things first, and that becomes a last resort. And I don't mean OAA, Jenny Craig meals, Weight Watchers. I mean the kind of work that I do and other eating disorders therapists that helps them with emotional eating, learning life skills, and just get rid of the good, bad diet mentality. Do that. And then if that doesn't work, okay. But, we don't have all the advertising money, but
Right.
bariatric surgery people do.
Right. So that brings us right into trauma and childhood trauma in particular. A lot of the times this the origin of not being able to be present with our feelings or not being emotionally self-regulated is from childhood. Can you comment about that and talk a little bit about how you work with that, how people might start to get into healing around that?
Sure. I always have to say this, 2/3 of a 3-part training on rapid resolution therapy, which is terrific. And anyone who's had trauma, I encourage them to go on their website, and the therapists who are trained in that, which is partial hypnosis, are terrific. From it, I have taken away the concept that what happens to us in trauma is the memory is stored differently. It's stored mostly in our amygdala. So when a similar situation happens, unless the brain intervenes and says, no, it's not really that similar, don't get upset, we're going to react as we did when we first had the trauma.
Right.
So I call it recall in reality. That's how I treat trauma. And for people to know, are you in recall? Or are you in reality? And that goes back to feelings, the purpose of feelings, which is to do something. Well, if a feeling comes up in a memory, there's nothing to do because it's over. So you don't have to have that feeling, which is telling you to do something, because there's nothing to do. So that means you come back to reality and say, what can I do in this situation? What do I feel in this situation? And it's a little more complex than that, but that's pretty much it. And rapid resolution therapy goes beyond that with a lot of different techniques. And so that's really how I treat trauma.
So the rapid resolution therapy helps people to release it enough that they can then do that kind of a mindfulness practice around.
I guess I wouldn't say even release it, but it makes a different meaning of what you're feeling.
Okay.
And it also helps to make a different meaning of the event. If you're the, let's say, parentified child who has to take care of 6 younger siblings while your dad is who knows where and mom's off drinking, and you are told, do this with your employees, you're going to feel stressed, I have to do this perfectly or else.
Right.
Because the or else was awful when you were a kid. But the or else is not so bad now, because you're an adult, they're adults. So it's recognizing that and not staying in the trauma memory. That there's just 2 choices. There's reality and there's recall.
Right. And so people would have the kind of the encouragement and support and training to be able to tune into themselves somehow when they're getting activated or when they're starting to get distressed.
What I tell them is, when you have feelings out of proportion to the situation, you're probably in recall.
Right.
And then learn your triggers. A lot of children who are in big families, in the middle, they feel invisible. So if they're in a situation and feel invisible, they're going to get upset and they want to go have comfort eating. Well, they couldn't do anything when they were 7, but they can now when they have that feeling. First, understanding where it comes from, and making a different meaning of it, which is, oh, okay, I feel a little lost. What can I do here? Speak up. I can listen. I can find other friends. So that's really, it toggles back and forth.
Right. So to be able to really see that there's other options than just eating.
Yes.
Now, anyway.
Yes, because you couldn't do it when you were young and dependent, but now you can, because it's what psychology calls putting a different frame around the same picture.
Right.
So that helps. That and monitoring your thoughts, that you don't have to hop onto any thought that comes by.
Right.
We'll evaluate it. So is this going where I want it to go, like getting on a train?
Mm-hmm.
The train's not going where you want it to go. Don't get on the train. Wait for another train.
Right. Right. And so what would a session of what you do with people, what would that look like? Maybe not just one session, because obviously it doesn't change in one session, but over a period of time, what would the kind of common experience be that when you're working with somebody?
First of all, even though I deal a lot with trauma and seriously dysregulated eating, people who are depressed, sometimes suicidal, I try not to, I like humor. It's in my books, it's just who I am. So
Mm-hmm.
I think most people come away from a session feeling somewhat lighter.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and we tend, myself included, to take ourselves very seriously. And if you can laugh at your behavior, or see it in a humorous light,
Mm-hmm.
it makes it a lot easier to change. Also, it decreases the anxiety in the session. We
Right.
tend to not change when we're anxious.
Right.
We don't want to move.
Yeah.
But if you're feeling a little lighter, people say, well, I'll go home and work on that. And I say, no, go home and play with it.
Yeah.
Language too.
Right.
And that's usually I start the way John Conley, who does the rapid resolution therapy, I think he starts his sessions by saying, how can I help you today? So,
how can I help you? What?
How can I help you today?
Okay.
And sometimes people have a list, sometimes they have something in mind, sometimes they have nothing, but so that they understand that, that's my role and I'm looking for something specific.
Mm-hmm.
That's where the seriousness comes in. We're not here to just fool around. Let's see what we can get done today.
Right.
And I sort of use whatever methods. I'm trained as a social worker. I do genograms, family histories. I do family therapy. I'll bring a spouse, a partner, a sibling in.
Mm-hmm.
And because I've blogged so much, if I want to go explain something, I'll just send people blogs, maybe we're up to 20 blogs on something after a session. So I do a lot of that to reinforce it.
And it seems like part of what you're doing is helping people understand what's happening inside too. There's an education component to what you're doing.
Yes. I had the husband of a woman I'd been treating finally came in and he said, I don't want to be in therapy because that means there's something wrong with me. And so a lot of people just need that kind of education.
Right.
That I would say that's it. I'm not goal oriented. Clients could do what they wanted with their goals, they wouldn't come to see me. So I want to get into the why you're not doing it. I'm not so interested in how you cheerlead for yourself. What has been getting in the way?
Okay.
And what are you telling yourself about? So I'm trained as a cognitive therapist. Beliefs under there.
Right.
If you see a piece of chocolate cake and you're full up to here and you're saying, oh, I have to eat it. What if I never see another piece of chocolate cake? You're doomed to eat it. If you say, oh, it's only chocolate. Okay, well, you could have it another time. That's fine.
Mm-hmm.
The self-talk is so important.
Right. What if people are, they've come off of some kind of alcohol or drugs or whatever kind of addiction that they've got, and food has become kind of the way that they manage their emotions now. And a lot of people would go, well, it's not such a big deal. All I'm doing is, binging a couple times a week or whatever it might be. So how do you kind of work with that? There's a continuum there of, okay, heroin, food, Netflix, most people manage and dampen their emotions somehow. How do you address that with people to get them kind of interested and optimistic about working in a different way with their self-care?
Well, I pretty much start with, what do you know about emotions? Why do you have emotions?
Oh, okay. Mm-hmm.
And that can be a session or two,
Mm-hmm.
quite a few blogs,
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah.
explain it.
Yeah.
And um, once they get that, we talk about, well, would they be willing to um, experience them and test it out, and see how they do with them. Learn to, what they call, tolerate the discomfort.
Right.
And I mean, and I think that's what all those things have in common. Any kind of repetitive behavior. A lot of what I see is keeping busy. If I only keep
Right.
busy, then my brain won't have to think.
Right.
And um, so sometimes we'll just sit in silence, see what it's like, and then they say, oh, they did it.
Mm-hmm.
Not in my office, they did it without eating. How did they do it?
Mm-hmm.
And I really try to get people to be curious about themselves.
Uh,
Neutral, not judgmental, just curious. And very few people can resist that. I mean, I have had some who just will not go there.
mm-hmm.
But most people like the idea of curiosity.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
that works well, curiosity. And the other thing I'm really adamant about is what I call bullying words. Should, need to, have to, must, supposed to, ought to.
Right.
Why bully ourselves? Rather, we can use words like want, wish, desire, would like to, prefer. And
Mm-hmm.
it feels different. So we talk a lot about that. I correct them a lot. And that makes for a shift.
Right. So their discussion internally is starting to change.
Yes, not I shouldn't eat that food. Find the place where you don't want to eat that food.
Right.
Or where you do want to eat that food. Forget the shouldn't. Because the only thing we need to do in life is die. That's it. Anything else is optional with consequences. And that makes a very big difference to people who are that all or nothing mentality, which comes with addictions.
Right. Right.
You know, we should be doing this, not looking at Netflix or not having a drink. What do you want to do?
Mm-hmm.
Start.
Well, and a lot of times there's, along with the numbing, there's the kind of numbing of our joy, our creativity, the fun. I like the way you were talking about fun. And also, what really tied into that for me was when a child is having an emotion and it's not safe for them to do that, to feel because of their environment, then we carry that belief through to adulthood. And that's actually no longer the case.
Right. And that's the perfect example of you call. Why didn't you say anything? I couldn't say anything growing up, but they could now.
Right.
Because the consequences are, so your friend gets upset with you. So you patch it up or you get more friends.
Right.
It's so different. A lot of what I see, and I was just thinking about our client yesterday, I see this a lot, is this rebellion. People, they don't know the war's over. They're still
Right.
rebelling against their parents who've been dead for 20 years.
Right.
I don't want to be like them. If they said to do this, I never want to do that. And so we do a lot of talking about, well, if you're still rebelling against them, you're still connected, attached.
Right.
And so what would it be like to just be authentic and think sometimes I'll be like them and sometimes I won't? And, certainly that authenticity runs through the whole eating disorder continuum. How to be an authentic person and take care of your own needs.
Mm-hmm. And there's two ways of connection or two kind of forms. One would be with other people, and oftentimes we don't have that. And the other would be with ourselves. So all of that judging and aggression towards ourselves, we're really not able to be with ourselves. And that's so sad.
It is. And so that's teaching self-love and self-care.
Hmm.
And I could always tell if I say to a client, "Do you love yourself?" If somebody does, they look at me like, "You crazy? Of course I." And then but somebody who doesn't, you hear them go, well, and
Yeah.
so that sense of um, unconditional love for self, you're not defective, things happened to you, you were
Yeah.
fine all along,
Hmm.
you still are,
Right.
just happened to you, it's not your fault.
Right.
As you know, with trauma, you know that's the stuff of it to make that new meaning.
Hmm. And to update so that you're able to take a risk now that would have been devastating if it didn't work out when you were 7 or 12, but now is
Right.
enough.
It's a different context
Yeah.
now. A dog, a dog in the woods that you're unfamiliar with that's growling at you, running straight at you is different than a dog on a leash behind a fence with its owner.
Right.
They're both dogs.
Right.
Circumstances are different. So if you can shift that's really half the work.
Yeah, the level of threat is very different there.
Right.
Might not be in your system, but then when you stop and go, okay, is this is this something that could actually hurt me?
Exactly.
Right.
Probability of harm is something people
Right.
don't think of. They just lump everything together.
Right. Yeah, the
And
primitive brain really runs the show.
yes, because it's the primitive brain of people 200,000 years ago. Our brains haven't updated.
Right.
So 200,000 years ago, you did have to watch out a lot more than you do now.
Yeah. So, what about someone who's really highly dysregulated, has had a lot of trauma? And I'm thinking of some people that I know that have done a lot of healing work, but still there's this strong compulsion. It's like the nervous system's going, you've got to give me some food. I've got to have this relief. How do you work with a level like that? Or is it the same, but just kind of a little bit more intense work with somebody?
I talk about self-regulation
Mm-hmm.
and how that is a life skill that I write about in Outsmarting Overeating. It is a life skill we need to have in many realms. And
Mm-hmm.
as it improves in the eating realm, it gets better elsewhere. As you practice it in other arenas, it gets better with food. This idea of knowing what is enough.
Okay.
And
So,
I,
oh, go ahead.
well, I was going to say, what I tease clients, people who are dysregulated, um, or in many realms have an enough disorder. They don't know what is enough, and that it's a
Okay.
felt sense. It's not what someone else says. It's
Right.
just a concept to so many people. Really, I get to decide, and it's empowering.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's a little scary. It's confusing, but I don't know. Well, you don't know because you haven't practiced it. But if you practice it for a while, you will know. Listen to the messages. So, um, whether it's trauma and somebody being highly reactive, or um, wanting food, um, or wanting to stay up rather than sleep, or sleep rather than get up and do things, that I like clients to have a model of self-regulation. That they never want to be way at one extreme or the other, that they want to be sort of in the middle.
Okay.
And that I talk a lot about the dysregulated nervous system.
Right. So what are some of the ways that you would have people working with that? Like you talked about a whole model. What would be in that model? Sleep is one.
Sleep is one. Asking yourself, back to the numbing during the day, writing it down. How do I feel?
Mm-hmm.
Getting in touch with what might be there to regulate, and that, asking yourself 5 times a day, you start to be able to say, "Oh, okay, that's what I'm feeling," and then, of course, it doesn't build up, because when it builds up, that's when we get dysregulated.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, So talking a lot about that. and that you can feel a feeling and do something, do lots of different things with it. People think that feeling it. I was talking to somebody today about anger. Oh no, I don't want to feel that. And because your parents had explosive anger, well, you could feel it, but you could say to someone, I'm hurt and I'm angry, and just speak it as you would anything else. That was a totally new concept that you could regulate. I
Right.
don't like words like control.
Mm-hmm.
I'm much more likely, which is also why I don't like disordered, because it sounds like the opposite, disordered eating. And
Right. Right.
why I say dysregulated versus regulated eating.
Mm-hmm.
That makes that want to be regulated, we feel best when we are, because then we can manage our lives. But if you're controlling, you're holding on too tight. And I talk a lot about structure versus freedom. If we have too much structure, we long for freedom. Freedom, we long for structure.
Right. So we
And
need to have that middle.
right, you want to be in the middle, because that's just how humans are.
Right.
And to pay attention to that and not think of it as a bad thing.
Right.
That's okay.
Right. If somebody is just starting to work with their dysregulated eating, the dysregulated nervous system, what are some things that are really key to start with? Like, you've covered a lot of ground in this. So what would be some key takeaways for someone who's kind of new to working with this?
Well, I always start off with telling them they're in charge of the patient.
Ah,
That I'm not them, and I might make suggestions which make them feel they're going too fast. I rarely do it the other way, but I try to. I want to be a step behind them with that,
okay. Mm-hmm.
and let them lead the way and say, you know what I did? I actually told my mother, da, 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 da. Really? Rather than suggest it. And so being able to self-comfort too, knowing what you're feeling, to know what you need.
Mm-hmm.
That's really important. So that's connecting to your emotions, that it's okay, that it's safe, because you can manage them. People are afraid of emotions hijacking. So I go back to all and the reality, and then what you can do. Self-soothing. There's some great deep breathing, 1 minute deep breathing exercises, or 3 minutes. Giving yourself a hug, rocking in a chair, going in nature. Green seems to make our brains a lot happier. And I mean, to a person, I've never met a dysregulated eater that knows how to self-soothe, including myself.
Right. Right.
So it is that. It's the tone of voice. I mean, they bully themselves into, stop doing that. Stop crying. Stop crying. So can you soften the voice? Can you talk a lot about compassion? A lot. And there's a great book by Kristen Neff called Self-Compassion.
Mm-hmm.
Always lending that. I have a huge library, and I lend books to my clients all the time. I push them on them. And then I tell them, did I push too much? So that they get to self-regulate.
Right.
We talk a lot about compassion. Why wouldn't you be kind to yourself? Internalization. So, that's the way I address the internal turmoil that people feel, so that they can start to relax and more comfortable. So they're doing it like in here, but they're also doing it here.
Right.
The one thing I'm not trained in is sensory therapy. I mean, I've had a little training. That's something I'd like to learn more about. That's really interesting.
Well, and it sounds like the work that you're doing, a lot of it, especially around emotions and getting to know what we feel and being able to tolerate our feelings, that is in the body. It is somatic.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah, I'm very encouraged to see that direction in trauma healing and all kinds of things. The last 10 years or so, people are talking a lot about trauma and a lot about the body and a lot about connection. So people who are lonely because they've been hurt by other people, they have unresolved trauma, and then they're turning to eating for that. It's basically the same thing again. It's that they need to learn how to soothe themselves in a way that's not food.
And you make a good point about trauma. Trauma used to be this awful thing. You lost both your parents in a car accident. It's parents arguing, being teased and bullied, or being isolated and not having any friends.
Right.
We're looking not just at the big T trauma, but
Yeah.
the little T trauma, and I think that makes such a difference that people, aren't told sort of, well, that's not that serious, just get over it. But that we're saying every little thing builds up to where you are. If you're doing this now, something wasn't right.
Yes. Yeah, and we can tell a lot about our childhood based on the thoughts we have, the beliefs, the actions that we're taking. Yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, to trace them backward. And then people
Right.
feel more validated and validating themselves.
Right.
So many dysregulated eaters or people pleasers, approval seekers. We have this constellation of personality traits, as you know.
Mm-hmm.
So I always say to them, and nice girls finish fat, is about adding traits. So you can color with all the crayons in the box, not just a couple of the crayons. And a lot of it is skills.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody needs life skills. Nobody learned them all. Nobody's
Right.
parents had them all. And when you have the life skills, even if you don't touch on the eating gets better.
Right. And if you just control the eating without the life skills part, it doesn't really last.
No, it can't,
Yeah.
because there's no real learning or change.
Right.
But the life skills will help everything.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Just making a better life.
You've written several books, and I've read several of them. What are the ones that you would suggest are, one or two to start with for somebody?
Well, I would say probably maybe in the order that I wrote them, but maybe not. My first book, The Rules of Eating, talks about our belief systems and self-care and
Mm-hmm.
connection to appetite, hunger cravings, awareness, fullness, and satisfaction. So that's the basics. My workbook on food and feelings talks about 7 emotions that are troubling to dysregulated eaters. It's a little perhaps more difficult for some people to go through. So I just tell them to just, go through. Don't feel you have to do every single exercise. Nice Girls is about personality traits. By outsmarting overeating is life skills. Then the most complex one for clients is Starting Monday, which is about our unresolved internal conflicts, about changing what we do for comfort and identity. So I would say we can work their way up to that one. That's probably the least easy read. But I think certainly the rules is fun and
Mm-hmm.
helps you be curious. Where I like to start with people.
The people that I talk to that I'm working with, but also just family and friends, there's so much despair. It's like, okay, low calorie diets don't work. How are we ever going to change? Like, we have all this momentum in our body, and you referred to kind of the chemical reaction in the brain when we eat sugar. And so there can be a lot of kind of, this is too big for me, I can't figure this out. So having these books, and you have a lot of blogs as well, it's you have a wealth of knowledge that people could start and really go through a lot of the major pillars of dysregulated eating, and really figure out for themselves, validate that we're not stupid because we have these problems.
Right.
Yeah.
And some of them are very much societal.
Yes.
And some are it's where our own stuff meets society's stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And Yeah, I think it's a real difference when people see someone else has done it,
Hmm.
book on it, talked on it. There are two kinds of people. There are the ones who say, oh, I could never do that.
Hmm.
They really don't do as well. And then there are the ones who say, well, if they did it, I can do it.
And that was
So,
something you said right at the beginning, was you felt if there was people writing books about that and they could do it, then you could too.
right. But the other people fall into despair, which
Right.
to me is learned in early childhood. It's what I call hopelessness on steroids. It's not just nothing will change. It's nothing is changing. Nothing will ever change. So why try?
Right.
And that, that's there's often depression under that. Um, that often needs to be treated before people can be curious and feel hopeful, like, oh, I can do this. I could take a little piece of it. Let's just see how I do with that piece. And
Right.
what I tell them is, you will never forget how to return to despair. If you really like it, you'll remember how. Go back to it. And they don't.
Right. One thing that was really interesting for me was when I was doing a lot of work around healing the food addiction, I started thinking about drinking. And I hadn't had a drink. Well, I have, 1 or 2 a year. I don't have an issue with drinking anymore. And it hadn't been since my mid 20s. And here I am, 65. And in my early 60s, I was starting to think, well, maybe I could just stop at the liquor store. But it was because I was really clear that food wasn't working for me anymore. And there was some kind of a panic around, well, if that's not working, maybe you better find something that will. And then I could sit back and go, well, I actually don't need anything. I'm fine. But there was that kind of panic reaction of, well, if that's not working, oh my gosh, what are you going to do now?
And I mean, I certainly understand that. And I think what helped you was that you stayed curious about it. You didn't
Yeah.
judge yourself. I shouldn't have that feeling. I mean, that's when everything closes down, but you stayed curious. Well, gee, that's interesting. I wonder if it's because I feel like everything's taken away and I don't have any backup.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
and then you realized you trusted yourself.
Yeah.
And if
Yeah.
if you weren't where you wanted to be, you'd find other ways to get there. You don't have to go back to something.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I think that's humans. We do get scared very easily, and I don't know if 100,000 years from now, if we're still around, humans will be different. I suspect they will,
Mm-hmm.
but it really dominates who we are.
Right.
They feel like fear because we just haven't evolved any farther right now.
Yeah. That's so true.
So it's okay. I mean, that's where everybody is.
And now we know so much more about the nervous system and how we get dysregulated and how we can come back into regulation and how we can, kind of work with that whole thing. I would really like for people to be able to get in touch with you. Some of the books that you mentioned, and I'll put some of those up on the screen here too. But what's the best way for people? What's your website address and Facebook? What's the best way for people to get in touch?
My website is easy, KarenRKoenig.com. I have links to my blogs. People can sign up and get them twice weekly. And they can look through these 1,000+ blogs that are categorized on the website about different issues. And, that's all for free. There's a link to my Normal Eating Karen Koenig Facebook page where several times a week you'll find articles about self-care and eating, body image, some parenting. And then my books are available on Amazon. I am licensed as a social worker, distance therapy, which is, online or by phone, in the state of Florida. So, Florida, you could be doing what Lynn and I are doing right now, talking about
Right.
the issues. I have a sliding scale. I'm always willing to take on clients. And so that's it. Most of what people need to learn about me, they'll find on my website. And then they can always email me as well.
Okay, that's wonderful. Your website is amazing. The amount of resource material that you have on there for free is a really great service for people. And I know lots of times people like to dip their toe in a little bit and, check things out. And, you've got years of blogs on there. And like you said, 1,000 plus. That's a great resource. I know I see your posts on Facebook a lot and always find it very interesting. And you're going way beyond the surface. You're really helping people to work on the deeper levels, which I really appreciate too.
Well, I think that's the payoff. I mean, the surface just doesn't work. So
Yeah.
you wouldn't want to be involved with it, and I wouldn't either. It's I think it's disrespectful and it's deceitful to others. That there is inner. I'm not going to call it work. There's inner play
Right.
to do, and having somebody to do it with just makes it so much easier.
Mm-hmm.
I'm 71. I'm still enjoying it. So I encourage people to get what they need.
Right. Right. Well, thank you very much for being part of the Radical Recovery Summit and for sharing the wealth of information in all the ways that you do, as well as coming on and doing this with me. This has been very nice.
Thank you. It's wonderful to have an interview with someone who really understands the material, and so that it really becomes a nice kind of dialogue and helpful to me. I really appreciate that about you.
Right. Oh, thank you very much. Yeah. Well, thank you.
Okay.
Go to kilobicenter.com, Radical Recovery Summit, for access to the interviews. You can watch them free online, or you could purchase an all-access pass. kilobicenter.com.